got this huge cyst. He's got a huge tumor that's just growing out on the side of his head there. And then you rotate the camera and you're like, wait, aren't tumors supposed to be symmetrical? Not really, but let's say we live in a parallel universe where that is the case. And then you're like, whoa, okay, I kind of screwed up there. This isn't symmetrical, and I've kind of, I kind of screwed up. If we're in Dynamesh, it's very easy. You'll just, probably do like a mirror and weld, or if you're in Dynamesh, it's very easy to resymmetrize your mesh. You can just go into modify topology, do this little mirror and weld, and you're done. But if I click on this right now, ZBrush is like, nope, I refuse. You cannot do this. That's like one of those tools that I mentioned before that does not work in Dynamesh. This is one of those tools that does not work with subdivisions. Mirror and weld will resymmetrize your mesh if you are working with Dynamesh. But if you're working with subdivisions, you got to use something else. And you'll see there's a lot of things like that. So the way that you can resymmetrize your mesh, if you're working with subdivision, by going down to your deformation tab and looking for a nice little entry right here that is called Smart Resim. And this works really, really nice. Let's click on it. Let's see what happens. Whoa! Okay, come on. I'm spoiling the fun. Let ZBrush do the work before I start to express myself. Look at that! Perfect symmetry. Everywhere over the face, actually. Not only did the tumor become symmetrical, also critically, you see that it kind of lost some volume there. If I do Control Z and if I redo it. But like the whole face, actually, everything about the face, everything there became symmetrical everywhere. And it did not change our topology, by the way, critically. Now, this wireframe is looking a little weird right now. So maybe I can actually give you guys this demonstration on this one here. But just do Control. Just undo a lot of these brush strokes, or actually, let me just go through my history slider here to a previous version. It wasn't as mangled. So Smart Resim will resymmetrize your mesh, which could seem magical because you're like, well, how does that work? Because it doesn't actually change your polygons, right? If I do something here once more, I click OK, that's fine. If I do something like this here and I do this Smart Resim, you can see that my object will pretty much stay. Well, that's weird. What's going on here? That's awkward. Where's my resymmetry? 61 symmetry points found. What's going on here? Let me just delete higher subdivision levels. See if that makes a difference here. Let's do a Smart Resim again. Boom, here we go. Okay. So the Smart Resim will not change your topology at all, but it still is able to say, even if you keep your topology exactly the way that it was before, if I click on Smart Resim here again, you'll see that it's going to resymmetrize the mesh. So it doesn't change the topology. The way that Smart Resim works is that it simply finds a correspondence. It finds a point correspondence on both sides of your mesh. It starts from the midline. It finds, where is the midline of the object just based upon its position in space. And then it will say, okay, starting from that midline there, so vertex, this vertex on this side of the mesh is at the same position as the vertex on the other side of the mesh. And it simply knows how the points sort of correspond with each other like that. It feels a bit magical. Kind of is, but it's all based upon topology. It's not based upon position in space. It probably just walks through all of the points and finds, on which side, like just based upon the geometrical structure, if you will, of the arrangement of points within the topology, which one matches with which. But yeah, so that will essentially resymmetrize the mesh. Now, of course, you're like, okay, but Laura, this isn't all that great. Like, I don't want to lose the volume here that I have on this. I want to have the antler on the other side. And what if it's the opposite that I want? I actually want to get rid of this. This is the side that I want to preserve, like I'm not interested in preserving this here. Well, Smart Resim by default will resymmetrize your mesh globally. It's going to take all the points on both sides and it's going to simply do the average of them. But it's good to know that if you have a mask somewhere, if I start here and I create a mask somewhere, and I mask out this little antler here, and then I do my Smart Resim, this is going to happen. ZBrush will say, oh, okay, these points are masked. I guess you don't want these to be Smart Resimmed. And then you're like, that's right. And then ZBrush is like, well then, let me take the points that are masked and let me copy them over to the other side in terms of intensity there. So essentially, the key to resymmetrizing your mesh and really preserving details where you want them is really just to mask out your mesh. What I like to do is I like to simply mask out like this, just do a box selection over the part of the mask, the part of the head that I want to fully preserve, and then you can do your Smart Resim. And that way. You don't have to deal with some of the subtleties there of having only a localized mask, but you could have only a localized mask. If I just mask the just this little part here, I'm gonna wind up with this here. I guess it doesn't much have a choice but to sort of do that here. Let me do a small mask over like one vertex. There you go. So yeah, if it's the opposite you want to keep this side here, simply mask that one here, do your Smart Resim, and there you go. So yeah, that's kind of how that works, So that will save you if you inadvertently start sculpting without symmetry. All right. So the other thing that we can kind of see here is if I show you guys a wireframe of this again. So I press Shift F, and actually I do have some here, but the wireframe is kind of looking a little screwed because of the reconstruction I have done. So if I switch back over to this one here, then perhaps. So the other thing is that if you load this Z tool that I've given you guys, and you press Shift F to see the wireframe, you'll see all these weird colors kind of appear on the surface, right? We've never really talked about these. We've talked last week about, press Shift F to just show the wireframe. But we haven't really talked about the notion of polygroups. So what you guys are actually seeing here, all those colors that kind of appear when I turn on the wireframe of my object here, those are all what we call polygroups. And you can think of polygroups as pretty much as selection sets. They're there to help you, they're kind of a shortcut to select part of an object a bit quickly, you know. And, last week, I don't know if we've talked too much about the selection or isolation within ZBrush. I assume that we haven't. We've talked about masking, but I don't think we've talked about this little rectangle here. So let's start with that then. Last week, we've talked about the fact that if you hold Control and you click and drag, you'll be able to mask something, right? So Control, click and drag, you can mask. If instead you hold Control Shift and you do a click and drag, I'll get this green little box that's going to appear there. And this is not a masking box. So Control Shift click and drag will give you this. And if I cross over part of my object like so, and I let go of my cursor, this is going to happen. We will be isolating some vertices. So this Control Shift box that appears is a box to isolate part of your mesh. You will be able to isolate different polygons based on what is crossing within the box there. Critically, just like we have talked last week, the Alt modifier or the Alt keyboard will inverse the effect of what is you are doing within ZBrush. And this is also true in this case here. So if you go ahead here and you do Control Shift, you start creating a box, and then you press down on Alt, you will be doing the opposite. Now, as opposed to isolating polygons, you will be hiding polygons. So whatever is crossing your box will be hidden. Kind of how that goes there. So you're like, okay, I've hidden a few things here, when something is hidden, by the way, it is not active. You cannot sculpt on it. I mean, that probably goes without saying, but it's still good to mention it. If I go here and I start doing all these weird manipulations to my mesh here, you can see that now I'm essentially starting to build a bit of a punk hairstyle over this head. So anything that is hidden will not be modified with whichever tool you are using. But so if you want to bring back the visibility of pretty much everything you've had, simply have to hold Control Shift down, and simply click on an empty space of your canvas. Control Shift click will unhide everything. Finally, if you want to inverse the visibility of whatever it is you have hidden, so you have something here that is mostly hidden, or there's only a few polygons here that are isolated. If I want to inverse the visibility of what's here, Control Shift click and drag on an empty space of your canvas, and you will inverse the visibility. But yeah, once I'm done with this, I want to unhide everything. Control Shift click. It's weird, right? Like ZBrush can be so weird as far as shortcuts are concerned. I'm pretty sure the reason why that is just because, as we talked about last week, it's all been coded for people who have a one-button stylus. I'm sure most of you have more than one here. You have probably quite a few now. That's probably very modern, but back in the day, I think there were a lot of one-button styluses out there, and so in that sense, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? That it's kind of weird like that. But yeah, so that's how you hide things. Since I'm here, by the way, so since we are talking about hiding, isolating, these sorts of things, I want to also maybe give you guys a bit of a, not advanced, but more intermediate knowledge of ZBrush, perhaps. If you open your brush menu right here and you press S, you will be able to isolate all the brushes that start with S, of course. And in there, you can afterward find this little icon here. So BSL will give you this select lasso here. So by default, we're on select rectangle, actually. This is the default, which is the rectangle that we keep doing for a few minutes now. But if I select the thing right next to it here, select lasso, I will be able to, as opposed to do a box here, when I hold Control Shift, click and drag, I'll be able to do a lasso like this. And that's fantastic. This is one of the best selection tools. This will be your best friend once you start to use this quite a lot. Select lasso, wonderful tool. Of course, also works to hide things if you hold down the Alt key. So go ahead, try that out on your side. If you're watching this after the recording's done, pause the stream, go ahead, just have a bit of fun. Try to get a bit of a feeling, a bit of a feel for yourself. There is something that's kind of weird too about Select Lasso, which is that it's kind of weird, but it's very useful, all right? But sometimes it's a bit weird, more weird than it is useful perhaps, but still, you'll get a hang of it at some point. When you have the Select Lasso that is selected, if you hold Control Shift, because once again, this is the keys that you have to press to be able to isolate or hide things. Once you start crossing over edges and polygons, you can see that it starts to look a little weird like this, right? Like I'm starting to get like a edge or vertex or points that kind of start to appear. If you hold Control Shift while you have Select Lasso selected and you click on an edge directly, you will hide that edge loop. So Control Shift click, and you will be able to hide individual edge loops while you have Select Lasso. This does not work if you have the default Select Rectangle box, by the way. This only works when you're in Select Lasso mode. But it is very useful because at some point you start working in subdivisions and you're like, well, maybe I kind of want to hide this edge loop here for some reason, right? And then maybe, I don't know, maybe I want to inverse my visibility afterward and I want to only work on this edge loop for some reason, that is a modification that is a manipulation we do quite often. That is how you do it. But enough of that. So let me switch back over to my select rectangle here. And so those colors then, so what are those colors? Those are what we call polygroups. And polygroups are quite simply selection sets. It's pretty much all there. They're just kind of a quick way to select things. There's a lot that we can do with those polygroups, right? So it goes beyond just selecting things. But this is what happens. So I hold Control Shift, I click on a polygroup somewhere. Let's say I click on this here, click on that. And then there you go. I have the lower lip that is now isolated. And I can therefore subdivide this. If I already have subdivision levels apply on this object, I can then start to work on the lower lip if I want, using my brushes. You know, I can start to sculpt stuff here. I could, if I subdivide this maybe once or twice more, you know, I could start to use, let's say, the DAM standard 2, which you guys can get here, this particular address here. I believe it's free. Not sure, I believe it's free. It's a great brush, by the way. Talk about it more next week in the context of tertiary details here, right? But I can go in here and I could already kind of start to like sculpt out some nice little wrinkles on these lips and stuff like that. You know, if I want to have some nice little lip wrinkles and stuff, I could already start to go and just have a bit of fun with that. And yeah, so I can start to sculpt here nice little details on my lips, even though the lips are crashing through each other. If I simply Control Shift click on the lower lip here, I can work on that in isolation. And you don't have to press Shift F to be able to click on a polygroup, by the way. You can click on a polygroup at any point, but Shift F will simply allow you to visualize them. In a nutshell, it's kind of what polygroups do. Now, you'll see that polygroups are extremely useful in a lot of contexts. There's a lot of contexts where polygroups are useful. Too many contexts that we can really cover them, that we can cover them all, you know, but it's the kind of thing that through the classes, you'll see that this kind of always comes up left and right, you know. Not when we're Dynamesh though, right? When we're a Dynamesh, you can technically work with polygroups in Dynamesh, but it's really better to consider polygroups to be one of those features that you more or less have access to once you're in subdivision mode. You know, so more advanced users will find a way to use polygroups with their Dynamesh there, but I won't talk about that now. So then the question is, okay, cool, Laura, so how did you create these to begin with then? Well, if you go down your tool palette here, you will eventually get to a menu entry called polygroups. And that is where you will go to create, modify, specify, change your polygroups. So by default, had I imported this from a 3D program, this would pretty much look like this here. If I press auto groups, it simply puts all the polygons that I have for my object within one polygroup. It's gonna just put them all into one big polygroup there, which is pretty much equivalent to, you know, what would be your starting point there. So the workflow to assign polygroups, the basic workflow to assign polygroups to a surface is more or less just a workflow that's kind of like this here. You know, you isolate something. Like, okay, cool, these polygons here, I want them to be on one polygroup because I want to have a quick access to them. at some point here. So like, okay, cool. Let's isolate polygons, and then let's click on auto groups. And every time you click on auto groups, ZBrush will simply group together everything that is separated, in fact. And so right now, this head is, ZBrush considers it to be separated from the rest of the head there. This part here of the head is considered to be separated when it is isolated. And therefore, ZBrush is like, cool, well, here's a polygroup then. So now I can, as you can see, and quickly select the top of my head. So this is great if you want to, if you watched Hannibal, the movie, not the series, with man, I'm forgetting his name. The guy who played Hannibal in Silence of the Lambs. What's his name again? God, I forgot his name. Guys in the chat. He's like obviously very famous as an actor.
Anthony Hopkins.
Thank you, God. Anthony Hopkins here. Yeah, so if you watch Hannibal with Anthony Hopkins, the movie, and you want to do a representation of the guy at the end who gets his head chopped open like that and he eats his own brain, well, that's, there you go. Now you kind of know how to start this. Sorry, guys. I have a bit of a gruesome side to me. All right, and like it's been coming out the last few weeks for some reason, but sometimes I just can't help myself. I think that's just when you work in character art, that's just what happens. All right, guys. Like I have worked in character art for long enough that I am completely desensitized to looking at gruesome stuff related to the body. It's like I've worked on Deus Ex, Mankind Divided, and at some point for one of the DLCs, it's like, okay, Laura, could you do this guy who's completely split open on an operating table? His whole thoracic cage has been completely open. His organs has been removed and put to the side, and he's been like there's this clan of people who start to like steal people's organs and stuff like that. And it's like, well, all right, it's like, well, it's not my first pick in terms of thing I'd like to work on, but if it needs to be done, then it needs to be done. So and I spent a few days just like looking at entrails and stuff like that, just to model them, and I've been completely desensitized after that to like stuff like that. That's the way. That's the career that is waiting for you guys. By the way, if you guys are interested in character art, this awaits you in the future. You will have to do that at some point. So better get used to it, I suppose. But yeah, so in a nutshell, that's kind of how polygroups work. Now, you guys can see there's a whole lot of stuff here, way more stuff than we can really go through. But I still want to talk about a few of these here, So, and perhaps just to answer the question too, like, okay, so great, Laura, but that still doesn't tell me how you went and you had these nice little clean little polygroups here to begin with. So, okay, why don't I answer that, and then I'll show you guys a few other nifty tricks here with the polygroups. Okay, let's say that I do Control Z. I come back here. This is more or less where we started, right? So this was the workflow to isolate the polygroups for the head and sort of create them. By the way, too, this is super interesting. If you rotate the head and you look at it from within like that, and especially if I go down here into my tool palette, and I go all the way down here to where it says display properties, I can actually turn on here double-sided. If you did not know about that, this is where you would actually do that. You want to see the back side of your polygons here, but there's this nice little thing that's kind of sticking out there. This is not a tongue that he is swallowing. This is what we commonly call, I love this term, by the way. I just love this term. This is what we call the mouth bag. So just imagine someone who's like swallowed the Ziploc bag and now it's kind of covering the whole inside of his mouth there. That's kind of how I picture this here. So this is what we call the mouth bag, which is very common to do once you do a head in subdivision, to have that in there. Because of course, you are separating your upper and lower lip. Therefore, you do need to have some space there, right? If I take my smooth brush here, you need to have some space within the mouth so that you can actually see the inside of the mouth. Especially if you're working on a production and your character will speak at some point. Yeah, so mouth bag here. I can click it through the mouth here and I can isolate it like that. But then that begs the question again. It's like, okay, well, Laura, but how do you go about doing that, right? Well, if you start with a head and that you import in here, and it's going to look like that. All of these have shortcuts too, by the way. I've changed these, by the way, so I don't know what is the default shortcut for auto groups, but there is one. So just put your cursor over it and check for your side to see what is the shortcut for auto groups, because when you do see me sometimes, when you see auto groups get magically applied, it is often because I'm simply pressing the shortcut for that on my keyboard, by the way. Yeah, see, you kind of start at this point here, right? And you're like, okay, so how do I go about this, right? How do I apply polygroups to this head so that it is useful for me? If you guys start from your own base head, of course. Here is the workflow. It's very simple. Super simple. First, let's do Shift D until we are at the lowest subdivision level that we have. I've turned on my double-sided display too, by the way. And I'm just gonna rotate my camera until I'm looking at the mouth bag from the inside there. And then I'm just gonna do an isolation. And I'm just gonna isolate just the one vertex here that is at the extremity of my mouth bag here. Just gonna isolate that one there, right? Which in turn isolates all the polygons that are connected to that. So now I wind up having this little kind of star that is sort of there, right? And now what I want to do is I want to grow the visibility of my object until I get to the lips. Very, very simple, right? You don't do that in polygroups, but you would do that from within your visibility menu that is right on top of that. Let's open that. Visibility. Let's go in there. Ooh, what's there? This is interesting. Ooh, there's a grow button here. That's cool. So what happens if I click on that? Well, this happens. You can grow the visibility of your object. And eventually, as you grow. Now, these kind of things will more or less happen because, there may be triangles somewhere and stuff like that. What I like to do at some point too, while I'm growing like this, just to keep it extra clean, switch over to select lasso, BSL, switch over to the select lasso, or put yourself a shortcut on that. And then here I'm just gonna do a lasso here. I'm just gonna hide these like that, so we get something that's nice and clean. I could already go in here and perhaps assign a polygroup to this. Let me do an auto group on this so that this gets assigned a polygroup for the inside of the mouth. And then let's continue. Let's continue doing a grow on this, right? So I'm just going to use the shortcut for this. Here once more, I'm not actually sure what a shortcut is for this, so please put your cursor over this, check out what the shortcut is, but I will simply do it on my side here. And I can continue to grow until I have the outside of the mouth. About like this. All right, cool. Now, of course, if I do an auto group, then these two things are going to get grouped together. Yeah, that's not great. So let me Control Shift and click on this here to hide it. On this polygroup here to hide it. And now I have only the contour of the mouth. I will do an auto group. Now this gets assigned a different polygroup. I can cycle this and have a bit of a disco feeling if I want to. It's kind of cool. And if I want now to separate my two lips here, there's a few different ways. This can get tricky depending on how what your mouth actually looks like, because you may get some interpenetration between the two lips there. So, you know, this may be easy, this may not be easy, kind of depends. But in this case here, it is actually very easy. Why? Because we've seen that if we use our select lasso brush, we can hide polygroups or hide polyloops rather, right? Select lasso, click on an edge that's hidden, click on an edge, hidden, hidden, hidden. And then eventually here, I can just probably just manually kind of hide that. In fact, before I do that, let me take this here, just auto group this. And then even, let me just hide a bunch of polygons here, just so that it goes a bit faster here. And then let me hide one loop here, one loop there. And then I can actually start to hide these loops like this now if I want to. Oops, sorry. Wrong click. Let me turn off symmetry so that there's no issues, as we have seen. Yeah, so, you know, you just hide stuff until everything that you don't want has been hidden there. So this, and this one. There we go. Do an auto group like that, and you're done. You have your polygroups for the contour of the mouth. And so you can isolate upper lip, lower lip, and work on these in isolation. All right, I'll let you guys figure out how to do the contour of the, or rather the eye bag. If we have a mouth bag, then we also have eye bags. I'll let you guys figure out how to do the, or rather eye sockets, perhaps. Yeah, I guess eye sockets is a bit less confusing because we have other eye bags on the face. I'll let you guys figure out how to do those. But yeah, you know, so just don't be afraid to like start to like apply a bunch of polygroups in different places if you think that it's going to speed up your life there. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about polygroups in the context of hard surface then. Just to give you guys a bit of a very, very gentle, very brief introduction to that. Let's put a head aside for now, and we'll come back on it after the break. Okay, let's say I have a cylinder. That's like this. And then this kind of happens. Like, cool, I have a cylinder here. I want to sculpt some details on this. Want to make some hard surfacey stuff on this. I'll go in here and I'll click divide, and then this kind of happens, right? You start to get this weird little stuff that's kind of happening here. It looks kind of awkward. And then, this becomes smooth. It's all kind of wrong, it's kind of awkward. You're like, I want to keep a hard edge on this. I want to have something that's hard here in terms of, I just want to keep a hard edge around here, right? And so that is when you need to start to talk about the notion of creasing. You want to have creases on this. You see, a lot of you have probably maybe used Maya. So I know probably a lot of you actually probably come from Blender. Fortunately, I do not have Blender experience that much. I've briefly sort of flirted with the software here and there to try some tools out, but haven't really worked in there too much. So I don't know what the concept of hard edge would be called within Blender there, unfortunately. But every 3D software has that concept where, well, perhaps someone knows actually. Who would know what is the? I'll keep an eye out too on the chat, by the way, if you guys want to write it out. How would we call the hard edge within Blender? Sharp edge makes sense. Thanks, Lev. I appreciate it. So a sharp edge within Blender then, which would be a hard edge within Maya, which would also be, if you're in 3ds Max, would be, actually there's no concept of hard edge within 3ds Max. There's only a concept of smoothing groups. But a hard edge would be a separation between smoothing groups if you were to use Turbo Smooth. So that concept is, of course, also within ZBrush then. It's within every 3D software. And within ZBrush, a hard edge is something that we call a crease or a creased edge. Now, I can't make vulgar jokes in English, but if you speak French, especially if you speak Quebec French the way that I speak it, or rather, if you speak Quebec French the way that pretty much anyone speaks Quebec French, you know that a crease, when you pronounce that in French, is actually a swear word. It's what you say to people when you, or rather, it's what you shout out when you are pretty pissed. But unfortunately, I can't make jokes like that because we are giving a class in English right now. But a creased edge is essentially it's a hard edge. So it's an edge that when you are subdividing your object will stay completely sharp, will stay completely hard there. So this is the basic idea, right? And you'll see that it's going to tie itself really nicely to the notion of polygroups in just a minute from now here. So within your geometry tab, you also have something here that we call, there is an entry here called crease. So that is 2 entries up from the Dynamesh. Crease right here. And this is kind of cool, right? So, okay, there's a lot of buttons here. We don't really quite know what they do. Let's just do crease. Let's just press this button and then see what happens. So I've pressed it. I've pressed crease. And now let's subdivide. And well, isn't that magical? Suddenly, this isn't just becoming a random subdivided blob of stuff, now we actually have kept some really nice sharp edges over the cap of the cylinder. Super cool. But uh, it's not magical. If you use other 3D software, this is very much like other 3D softwares, that are out there. You often have a certain tolerance value that is in degrees that you can tweak to, so that the software will simply know where it needs to crease, if you do this kind of automatic creasing over the whole surface. And you have this little value here. So this is creased edge tolerance. You can see that it's set to 45 degree by default, And of course, these polygons are at 90 degrees from each other. So they are obviously over that limit. But if I was to say crease tolerance is, let's say, 174, and I do a crease now, and I subdivide, we're back here, And conversely, if I put this value down to 1, and I do a crease, and I subdivide, now essentially nothing smooths itself because pretty much every polygon here has more than 1 degree between them of difference. And something curious kind of seems to happen too here, right? When I press crease, you guys can see that it's actually, it seems to be doubling, or actually it's technically tripling the display of these edges here in the viewport. You can see here, thin edge, creased edge, uncreased edge, creased edge. It's very, it's very small, but you'll see it, of course, if you just put your face close to your screen. And it's just a display thing though, right? Okay, like we're not adding polygons, we're not doing things. This is just a display for ZBrush to tell you these edges have been creased. We could also do an uncrease all, of course, which will remove all the crease over the surface. And finally, if I put this back to the default of 45 here, right next to it is this little value here called crease level. This one is super interesting because this will define a subdivision level after which ZBrush will stop creasing. So let's say I put this down to, let's say, value of 3, let's say. So my crease level is at 3. My crease tolerance is at 45. Let's do a crease. And let's subdivide, So for the first few levels, you can see that I still have something that is extremely sharp. And then eventually, after I go up my number 3 level here, now I'm going to start to have some nice little smooth bevels here. So maybe this is still too high. Let's bring it back down a little bit. So let's bring it down to 2, let's say. And do our crease again. Do our subdivision. And now we can subdivide this, but keep these nice little bevels that really catch light in a very nice way. Cool. Okay. That's kind of nice. But that actually ties in really well also to the notion of polygroups. Here's a nice little trick I like to use, all right? I often like to do something like this. I'll go down to my polygroup menu. I'll look for a button here that says Group by Normals. which here too, if you're used to 3ds Max, let's say, this value would be pretty much the same thing as moved by normals in there, kind of the same thing. Specify a maximum angle tolerance. You do your group by normals. And what this will do, it will simply create polygroups based upon the edge, based on the just based on the difference in terms of angle between the polygons that you have, right? So this is a very, very easy way to, if you're working with something that's hard surfacey, you just go in here. Often you need to tweak this little max angle value. But this is a very easy way, if you work with something that's hard surface, to just separate in different polygroups the different faces that you would have on your surface there. So yeah, super cool. Bring this back down to 1, do your group by normals, and now it's pretty much looks like that. And so on and so forth. Cool. And even better, perhaps, because now, now this has been polygrouped, but it has not been creased. So if I subdivide, there won't be any sort of creasing here. What I love to do when I work with hard surface stuff is to first do a group by normals and tweak the polygroups the way that I need them. And then afterward, go to my geometry tab, go to my crease here. And as opposed to click on crease, because I may have changed these polygroups around a little bit. I may have said like, okay, I want this polygroup. Maybe I want this here, but then maybe with that, for some reason, maybe I also want to have these polygons that are part of the same polygroup. So I can go ahead and I can actually kind of start with this here. Can inverse my visibility. I can hide these polygons here. I can inverse my visibility again. And now you can see that these two pieces of my surface are within the same, or are both isolated right now. And then I can do an outer group on that. And, so now, maybe I want to have a crease here, but that doesn't necessarily cleanly follow the sort of edge tolerance that we had before. And that is where you would do crease polygroups border. This little crease PJ here, that's what it does. It's exactly what it does. It will, if I show you guys the wireframe, crease the separation between your polygroups. Super useful stuff to use. And then again, if I subdivide this, this is the result. Okay, obviously this is very abstract, but you can already start to use that a little bit to start to explore hard surface a little bit. There are cases where this is pretty much already more or less the starting point that you need there. But a few things already become kind of interesting. As I said, we'll come back on the topic of hard surface once the time is right. But I want to just show you guys a few more extra tools that you have at your disposal to do some hard surface and to start to explore that with the subdivision mode. Now, the thing with creasing, all right, and with subdividing an object is that after you have subdivided something a few times, I can certainly go in here, of course, and I can start sculpting on this, of course, because now this is an object that's been subdivided. I can go ahead and can go to town and have some fun on this if I want, right? But at no point now do I have to control, if let's say these kind of bevels were too small for me, like I'd like to have them actually be a bit sharper there. Well, you wouldn't be able to do what I'm about to show you guys while you could be actually sculpting, but let's just ignore that, right? Let's say that I have imported something out of an external software and I just want to have a smooth representation of it. Actually, I got a great idea. Why don't I load what we were looking at last week? That character there. I mean, that character I sculpted like 13 years ago or so now. Why don't I load that here just for the sake of it? Just for the sake of it, because there's a few pieces in there that are kind of hard surfacey that are kind of interesting to explore more than just a simple cylinder. As you can imagine, the thing with subdividing something is that if you are using creasings, that once something is subdivided, you can't change the crease values. You can't have something that has a bit of a smoother blend or something like that, or so let's take a look at some of these objects that are here. Okay, so these are clips that had been made within an external program. These had been made in 3ds Max because back then we didn't have hard surfacey tools the way that we do now within ZBrush. Let me just go ahead and merge a bunch of stuff here. Actually, let me do an auto group to separate all these little clips into separate polygroups. First of all, and then let's say I just want to work on this one here, or just work on this here, right? So this is a relatively simple object. Let me go ahead here and go down to my modify topology tab in geometry. Let me delete hidden. So everything that I have hidden, I will delete it from the subtool so that now this is a floating little clip and there's nothing else in this particular tool. Okay, and finally, you guys can see how many vertices there is here, but I can actually merge these very, very easily by using the weld points that I have right here. Let me just increase this value here a little bit. I'm not sure actually if maybe I don't have enough resolution for this. Okay, well, I wanted to have some fun with this, but I kind of forgot that I had subdivided this to begin with. Inside an external program. So trying to start to do some manipulations on this. I could use ZModeler. I wanted to maybe not go that far today, but what the hell. Let's do a collapse polyloop. Yeah, no, that would probably start to take a bit too much time. That would have been nice to use, but it had been done too long ago. Okay. All right. But you can imagine you have imported this from an external program and you don't have little bevels that you've already built into the surface and stuff. There you want to do these inside of ZBrush instead, right? So let's use a cube. Much simpler representation of an object, of course. And actually, let me create a new cube. Initialize, let me say I want to have a cube, resolution 1, cube. There you go. This is a perfect cube. Okay, and in fact, we already have polygroups for each polygon, but let's just disregard that. I'll come back on ZModeler in just a minute, but guys, let me just do something here very, very quickly. All right, let's say I have something that kind of looks like this somehow, right? It's kind of where we were before. Come back in this in just a minute. I don't know, something like this. Okay. So you can imagine that, sure, at this point, I could actually go here. I could go to my polygroups. I could do a group by normals, which would kind of give me this here. I could crease based on the polygroups. I could go to crease bj. There you go. I could subdivide this, but now I would be committed to this. But there is, in fact, something that we call dynamic subdivision within ZBrush, which allows you here, if you go to dynamic subdiv, this is this menu here that's 2 entries up from creasing, all right? Dynamic subdiv. As opposed to this normal subdivision mode that we have explored up until now, you also have something in ZBrush we call dynamic subdivision. And what this is pretty much just a display, all right? This is just a display to see what your object looks like once it is, in fact, subdivided, but it does not truly subdivide the object that you have. It's just a display thing. But the great thing about this display thing, once you turn on this little dynamic button here, is that, well, first of all, I could increase the number of display subdivision that I have on this. So let's put this at, I don't know, maybe number 4. And then the great thing about this here is that afterward I can go to crease. And if I continuously play with this little crease slider here, you guys can see that I can actually have bevels that are bigger or smaller simply based upon my crease level value that I have set here. So these creases are still live, if you see what I mean, because this is just a subdivided mesh that is displayed for your own pleasure, but is not actually subdivided, you know. So I couldn't go in here and start sculpting micro details on this because it is just a display thing when I turn on dynamic subdiv. But it is certainly very, very useful in a lot of cases. Let's say that I had something like this here. You guys can see the kind of result that I get, you know, because here I have edges that are not creased. And so they become smooth when I turn on dynamic subdiv. So super useful stuff. Which brings me essentially to that tool I've been using to model this so far. Which brings me down to this particular tool, which is ZModeler. Now, this is not a course on ZModeler. I just want to introduce it so that you guys kind of know where to find it and you can kind of explore it. The best way to learn ZModeler is to explore it by yourself, all right? There's no way to, like, it's too confusing as a tool to really, for anyone to be able to really break it down in the most exhaustive way that is very, very clean. You know, you just have to explore it here. But this is how ZModeler works essentially. As you guys have seen, I've essentially started from a cube and I've started to just push and pull different polygons, just start to like create something that is a bit of a kind of quasi clip here in some way, shape, or form, right? So ZModeler, all right, access it by pressing B to go into your brushes, press Z to isolate the brushes to start with Z, and simply look for ZModeler right here. And that will put you in that traditional polygon modeling mode of ZBrush. And now you can disregard this here that kind of appears on the top. You don't need to care about that particular toolbox, all right? The whole thing about ZModeler, all right, is that once you are in ZModeler mode, the moment that your cursor crosses over your object somewhere, anywhere really, if your cursor is right over a polygon and you click on it, you will be pulling out that polygon because the default function attached to ZModeler in polygon mode is what we call this Q mesh thing, which is really kind of confusing. But the thing is that ZModeler is a tool, is kind of a hybrid tool to modify both polygons, vertices, and edges at the same time. Like it's all these three things kind of more or less packaged into one thing there. And what I mean by that is that you guys can see if I put my cursor over a polygon here, although it is subdivided here, even though I have dynamic subdiv on this right now, I can still actually press Shift D to turn off dynamic subdiv. And if I press D, you can see that now I have this little button where ZBrush says, do you want to turn on dynamic subdiv? Is that what you want to do? You're like, yes. And so you can Shift D, turn it off, D, turn it on. It's the same buttons as for your traditional subdivision mode, but in this case, it works for your dynamic subdiv as well if you have already turned it on before. Anyway, the moment that you put your cursor over a polygon somewhere, and you press spacebar, you will see all the functions that you can do on polygons. So for example, all right, by default, I have this little Q mesh kind of tool that is selected by kind of default, kind of does some weird stuff like that. If I turn on dynamic subdiv, it's a bit clearer what it does. It does some really weird stuff, like see this kind of weird stuff that it does. It's kind of useful because it often like snaps polygons in a way that's somewhat intuitive. It's kind of weird, but it is interesting. It is very useful. Whereas if I put my cursor over an edge and I press spacebar again, now I can access all the functions that are related to edge modification. So for example, maybe I want to put my cursor over an edge and I want to insert an edge loop that goes all the way around this polygon that I have extracted from my surface. I will put my cursor over an edge. I will press spacebar and I will go in here and I will select something that is called insert. And this will allow me to insert a single edge loop that is essentially using the edge that I click on and goes all the way around. So I can kind of like really quickly kind of add a bunch of edge loops here if I am missing somewhere. As you can imagine, if I put my cursor over an edge and I select something like delete, I can actually delete either a single edge or a full edge loop. In this case here, I want to delete a full edge loop. So I'll do that, do that. That's gone, that's gone, that's gone, that's gone. And finally, as you can certainly imagine, if you put your cursor over vertices, you will also have access to functions that are dedicated to vertices. A ZModeler is also a bottomless box of secrets. It's not going to replace other dedicated 3D modeling softwares anytime soon. But it is a way to make some traditional polygon modeling within ZBrush, and it is useful in certain cases. Because there are some weird stuff in there, For example, here, I will put my cursor over a polygon. I will press spacebar. I will go in delete mode. I will delete this polygon. I will delete this polygon here. Now I have two open borders. Let me go ahead here and turn on double-sided here. And then, well, maybe I could like bridge these two holes together. Why don't I do that, right? Yeah, you can actually do something like that. Let me put my cursor here over, or maybe from here to there. Maybe that could be interesting. Why don't I do something like that? Okay. Let me turn off symmetry, else it's probably not going to work all that great. Okay, let me put my cursor over an edge. Let me hold spacebar down. Let me go into bridge mode. And then let me say I want to bridge two holes together. And now you can see there's all these functions that kind of appear there, and we don't have time to go into all of these here. But I'll just keep the default options, and let's just see what happens there, right? So now I click on one hole, I click on a second hole, and now I can start to do some crazy stuff like that. Boom, there you go. We've just made an archway. Let me do it again. Click one, click two. And then just by playing around with my cursor here, I can control in one direction the amount of loops that will create my arch. And in the other direction, I can control the elevation of it. Super cool, super useful. It's an endless box of secrets. I could close this hole if I want. I could put my cursor over an edge. I can go into close. I could say I want to have a concave hole. I could just click on this, and there you go. I want to remove these two polygons now. I could do that too. Put my cursor over those. Or rather, I want to remove those two edges. I want to put my cursor over those. Go into delete mode when I am in edge mode. I want to delete only one edge. And I will click here, click there, and we're back having something that is quad-based. And now I can do an auto group. And I can do a crease polygroups. Press D. And now I have a super smooth thing. So yeah, that's all I want to say for ZModeler. I know it's a lot to take in there, but do explore it on your side, because there's no better way to learn ZModeler than to explore it on your side. Once we get to like more hard surface stuff there, in terms of topics, then we'll certainly talk more about perhaps subtleties and other kind of cool stuff that we can do for this, But for now, I think that this is probably a pretty I hope it is a very satisfactory introduction to the topic there. All right, guys, let's take a break. It is it's 9 minutes to 2 p.m. here. Let's take 15 minutes. This was a lot of stuff to like just jam into your head. We don't have nearly as much content, all right? I really wanted to go through all these things because this is recorded. You guys can go back. You guys can re-listen very attentively certain parts of this first part of the class. If I went too fast over things and you want to try stuff on your side, of course. And so let's take 15 minutes just to let you guys really have time to really let all that information get digested there. And so I will see you guys at 5 minutes past the hour there. Enjoy the break. Let's keep going. Yeah, so that was a lot to go through for the first part of the class. The second part of the class, you'll see I still have a few functions I want to kind of introduce that we haven't really talked about. Mostly, there's really three things. One is the concept of how do we use this plugin that we call a zwrap. The second one is how do we use layers? And thirdly, how do we use something called morph target? It's not going to be as much cramming in information as the first part of the class was. So we'll probably have a bit of a more relaxed vibe, perhaps, for the second part of the class there. Let me just go ahead and